And good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Building a Winning Team. My name is Trevor Blair, founder and CEO of Blair Search Partners, and we are a recruiting and executive search firm for the nonprofit sector. And every month, we have the opportunity to sit down with leaders in the social impact sector and talk about what's on their mind and what's moving this space forward. Today, we are really fortunate to have Dr. Ellen Neufeld, president of California State University San Marcos, as our guest. And we're particularly thrilled to have Dr. Neufeld on the show. Our team has worked extensively with Cal State San Marcos over the past few years on 7 different searches at all different levels. And so we're excited to speak with Dr. Neufeld today, particularly around the topic of social mobility, which is where the university is really blazing trails and really standing out nationally and really garnering some well-deserved recognition, which we'll talk about. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. My colleague Tori is assisting us off stage, and we'll get those questions up as we can. And with that, we will go ahead and dive into today's conversation entitled Transforming Lives, a University President's Vision for Social Mobility. Dr. Neufeld, if you don't mind, your team provided some beautiful bio points, and I'm just going to read these verbatim because they're too good not to. California State University San Marcos President Ellen J. Neufeld is nationally recognized for her trailblazing leadership in higher education and dedication to advancing student social mobility. Dr. Neufeld's career has centered on student success and student social mobility, and she's firmly committed to ensuring that any student who dreams of earning a college degree has that opportunity. Dr. Neufeld is a tireless advocate for redefining what it means to be a student-centered university in the 21st century. Awesome stuff. Dr. Neufeld, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. Well, as we kind of set the stage and start talking kind of at the foundational level, the journey to becoming president of CSUSM, if you could tell us briefly about your journey and your rise to the helm of the university, and then we'll go from there.
Well, you know, for me, I go all the way back to I was literally born into higher education. I am simply just one of those lucky individuals. And I was born when my father was at Michigan State University, and my parents were in married housing. And I always say that's what they needed was I was the youngest of 3 girls, and they needed one more child in the middle of that moment. And there I came and surprised them. But for me, it's really a story of gratitude because, you know, everybody has, if we're talking about social mobility, a social mobility story. For me, it starts with my parents. My grandparents were German Russian Mennonites living in the Soviet Union. Many of those folks now would have been in what we now know as Ukraine. And they came over, they couldn't have probably come to the US. They came to Canada and Mexico, and they worked on other people's farms when they first came. And, you know, from there, somehow my father went to college. And because he went to college a generation later, I'm a college president. And that is not lost on me, what the gift that my parents gave me, and really how I always thought of them, you know, as very much rule followers and living a very simple life, but they were really quite radical in the idea that they were in married housing on a university campus. And I grew up in Middle Tennessee, in rural Middle Tennessee, and eventually I started, you know, as many people do, I started a career in business. I was a manager of a department store. Then I got my master's, and I was a counselor. And then finally, you know what, I landed in higher ed, back in higher ed, all by accident. I just really missed being around a university. And one job and one responsibility led to another job and another responsibility. So I went from regional university in Tennessee to Maryland to Virginia. And I came here from Old Dominion University. I say I traded one ocean and one Navy base for another ocean and another Navy base. But the work I did really around enrollment and student support, was, especially at Old Dominion, has always been around social mobility. We just didn't think about it or always name it. It's always about helping first generation students or students whose families always hadn't had the opportunity to be part of a university to get there and graduate. So when I got the opportunity to come to Cal State San Marcos and the mission here and what all these wonderful people here did, I felt like I had won the lottery. That was about 7 months before the pandemic, so the lottery lost its luster for a little while. But that really, the journey, in many ways, one would have never thought of me. I went back to my undergrad and I said, nobody would have written in my yearbook once upon a time, most likely to succeed at anything. I was terribly shy. So the fact that other people helped me along the journey and that one step led to another, really, it is, I think there's always different journeys to everything. And for mine, to be a college president probably would be shocking for those that knew me once upon a time.
Wow. So 4 of you in married housing. Was that 6 people in probably a 2-room dorm?
I was the youngest of 3 girls, so there were 5 of us. Yes, it was a 2-room, and
Wow.
And I think we were out of room when I made sure we were out of room when I came along. Yeah, it was, and my mother at the time, here we are. She went to work to put my father through school. Just such an amazing thing in the time period that happened.
Yeah. So this mission of social mobility is obviously deeply personal to you, and you're bringing both the academic lens and the lens of lived experience to this. I thank you for kind of sharing the connection between the two for us. So I would imagine you are speaking with students constantly. You are speaking with young professionals constantly. We have a lot of aspiring education leaders who follow the show. A lot of our clients are in the K-12 space and higher ed space. We're probably watching now as well. What advice would you share with either a student or, say, a young person who just got that first professional degree, who someday might be aspiring to an executive leadership position in higher education? Words of advice, recommendations for how they can put themselves on a path similar to yours?
One thing I always think about is the journey to an end goal is rarely a straight line. And so you can't be scared to fail or try something new. And also, you can't take yourself too seriously. I learn more from our students and the people in our community and the people I work with right here on campus every day than I could ever teach. And if I don't go into that in a humble way, I'm going to really miss something. And I think that so many times there's this idea of that leadership or achieving a presidency on a college campus, whatever that goal is, that there is one path or one way in, and that there is, sometimes that you have to always know what you're doing, or that there is almost an arrogance to it. And I would say it's just the opposite. I would also say that, I've always, I mentioned that my parents were, German Russian Mennonites, so values and being taught how important our values are really had an impact on me. I would also say, though, for people that are moving up, they become more clarified for me every time I make a new decision or walk forward, and harder to sometimes balance the competing interests or thoughts that are going on. But those values really are the hallmark and the North Star, if you will, every day when I get up in the morning, because these are hard, weighty things. The other thing I'd say is perfection is far overrated. So you have to have a sense of humor about it. Because tripping and stumbling is part of the journey. And the other thing I want to give, and I want to, just in terms of like the actual job and working your way in, I didn't come through what many people in higher ed think of as a traditional route. It used to be that you needed to come through this way and that way, and there were all these steps. And the journey to a college presidency, or really any journey right now, there's so many ways or shapes and forms. I always had to be open to what the opportunity was that I could learn. And sometimes as a new professional, I would say I would pick up a task when I'd watch somebody drop it on the floor. I wasn't scared to volunteer to take on something new and to add it to my portfolio or to mix and match. And what I learned is a lot of times what somebody wouldn't do or thought they shouldn't do or thought maybe they were beyond doing, it would give me experience to pick it up and grab it and move forward with it. And that willingness also helped me be tapped for different things. Mm-hmm. And by the time I was interviewing to be a vice president once upon a time, I remember the president of the university at the time asking me, what is it in this job that you already have experience with? And I said, well, there's very little I don't have experience with, because whether it had been for just a short time where I'd been the interim director of something or picked up something for a while, because of my willingness to do that, I had a breadth of experiences that put me in a great position to get that first vice presidency.
And there's a great leadership lesson in there as well, right? As we're thinking through about talent acquisition, talent management, and also managing one's own career. And that is the willingness to roll up your sleeves.
Oh my gosh.
And be an executive who's not afraid to jump right back in there in the trenches to get the job done. And I think that's a quality that a lot of boards are looking for in CEOs and executive leaders. And it's something that you can't always take for granted.
Oh, and I think it's so important. I think it's such an important piece to be willing to do that. And it's a learning opportunity every time. I read an article in a higher ed journal where it talked about jobs that had no pathway up to the next job, I guess you'd say, or up to a leader in administration. I looked, and some of those jobs I had held. In my own mind, I'm like, what do you mean there's no pathway? And so, I think it is about, obviously, I don't mean that like it's not easy. We have to create our path, but at the same time, be open to the path and the twists and turns that lay out before us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I couldn't agree more. That a lot of times we have the end goal in mind in our career, but we can't rely, and we'll probably come back to our conversation on social mobility, but we can't rely on traditional mechanisms and positions for getting there, because they may not exist, or they may not be open to us, or they may not fit our lives, right? That sometimes our personal life does not allow us to take the traditional path.
I think that's very true.
To cobble together what I like to call a portfolio career, and of different experiences with different organizations that in some give us the full skill set of what we need for that next move. It's just not a linear path.
And I think what you're saying about the job we might be applying for doesn't exist today. I mean, I know we talk about that often in higher education is, we're preparing people for the future and the careers maybe we haven't seen. But even in higher ed, like the job I had at Old Dominion was very unique. It was this unique unicorn and a job that really hadn't been around. Because of the breadth of what I'd been able to literally, I'll call it dabble in, it made me competitive for that role. But it wasn't something I could have ever said, well, that's the type of leadership job I want one day. Because it was one that, that president at the time when he came in was literally working to create around his vision. And so, it was what I call high risk, high reward, because, there hadn't been a lot of positioned like that in a portfolio, and it worked out.
And you weren't afraid to take that risk, right?
I'm afraid.
I've never seen before, and it doesn't exist anywhere else, but I'll do that, sure.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there was some fear involved, but it didn't stop me.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are really important life and career lessons, right? That, sometimes playing it safe is actually not the safe choice.
That is true. I think sometimes we can feel, me included, all of us, I'm not in any way, when I speak, I'm not speaking about somebody else I always hear, but sometimes I have watched people where you looked up and you've been preparing for whatever that is for a long time. And then all of a sudden, what that was, it moved, it changed, it morphed. And so you never know where the path is going to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And on that point, just one more question about your background, Dr. Neufeld. We have a really insightful comment from Dr. Christoph, I should say, Hilscher. And relating to your background, when you look at your peers, would you say your path embodies what we just talked about? Is your background a little bit different when you look at your typical university president?
It is for a university president, but I will say that path has been ever changing in recent years. So I remember when I got this job here, and I had worked largely in enrollment, student success, but I'd also dabbled in the government relations field, institutional research, all of these different things, and it really wasn't what we think of as the traditional path to a presidency. And I remember somebody that was leading a professional organization coming to campus to talk to me and said, we're kind of watching because, this kind of door basically to somebody like you hasn't always been open. But I would say now, and even probably then, there were people that came before me that made sure doors were open. I think that's changing so much. And some people would say I'm very traditional because they came up through, academia in a large part. But I think now that world is going more and more wide open of who's becoming a college president.
Fantastic. And so as we now focus the conversation a little bit more on the concept of social mobility and again, your path exemplifying so much about what we're talking about. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the concept of social mobility and how Cal State San Marcos defines it and sort of lives it and breathes it every day.
Well, and as I talk about social mobility, and it is near and dear to my heart, I will say that the people on this campus, when I came, even if we hadn't put a word or words around it, we're really embodying it and do every day. So they're the real heroes of all of this. When we think about social mobility, obviously it's the idea of moving from one socioeconomic status to another. There's we can get really technical about the quintiles of and the economic mobility, but really that doesn't matter. It's about moving. It's about the advancement of that. And it's Cal State San Marcos. We go many steps further, right? So social mobility, yes, is about income. It's about the career trajectory, but also, it's about better health outcomes. We think of it as how do people lead in our region beyond graduation? How are they leading for the next generation? We have leaders from city council members to teachers to heads. You're talking about heads of nonprofits, businesses. Really leading with a servant mindset in our region from our campus. So that's a big part of it too. And while social mobility isn't all about a college degree, it is a very big, important part of the journey. But in higher education, we were really built to exclude. We were not built to advance that as an industry. I'm not talking about Cal State San Marcos particularly, but as an entity. And so, at Cal State San Marcos, it is about bringing students into the university whose families and the people that have come before them may not always have had those opportunities. It's about talking about the greatness of a university, not who they leave out, and that's selectiveness or the idea of prestige, but on not only who comes in, but graduates, and then what they do after graduation. And right here, we know for our region that on our surveys, 8 out of 10 of our graduates stay right here in the region. there's so many, I guess, whatever the buzz line is the idea that people say, is college worth it? If you just want to look financially as whether or not college is worth it, Georgetown did a study, and a degree is worth on average $2.8 million in a lifetime over those that don't have one. Obviously, this isn't all about money, but it is a trajectory for many. And we know, and when I talked about my story, well, my story doesn't compare to the amazing stories of our students here. And the idea that when somebody goes to college for the first time in their family, it is a ripple effect. It changes the trajectory of everybody in their family, but also in their communities. We also know in terms of social mobility is the idea that our economy is dependent on more people having the opportunities. We know working right here with the San Diego Economic Development Committee that they say we're going to need 20,000 jobs annually with new people coming in with a college degree. So it's incumbent on the future economic prosperity of our regions. The world population is declining. The U.S. population is declining. The California state population is declining. It just is. And it is incumbent on us to bring more people into higher education and have the opportunities beyond that. The other thing is it's so important when we look out here at what's happening, going back to the Economic Development Committee, you look at who is in the jobs right now and who's in K-12. And our students really match the demographics in K-12. That is so important to make sure that we are creating that pipeline to many of these careers and jobs in our region.
And you mentioned the ripple effect, and not to get too bogged down in the data, but I would have to imagine if, say, a family the size of yours with, say, 3 kids, if one goes to college, the likelihood of the other 2 siblings to go to college, and maybe even the parents to go back and get a degree, I mean, it must go up 10x once that first step, that first family member gets their degree.
It does, especially for the siblings, but you're right about the parents. And sometimes we will see parents here following their students or going to school at the same time as their children. So it is the ripple effect across the family. But even, and we will see, I'll talk to a student who's graduating and they'll say, my younger sister's coming, my cousin is coming. It is a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. And looking at it the other way, what could possibly derail social mobility? We think of it as again, going back to what we were talking about earlier with career paths, right? Nothing is ever that purely smooth, straight line. What are some of the factors that could potentially derail someone who is starting to benefit from social mobility, and how do we address that?
Well, the barriers are everywhere. If we think about, so I come into the pipeline at the university, but really those that have had the opportunity in many cases to go to a university have had the opportunities all the way through. So they've had at least enough financial status in their families to move them through the pipeline. It's about the schools that they are able to go to and the opportunities they're able to have in K-12. And so being first generation can actually be an obstacle. It shouldn't be. And then to affordability, obviously, is big. Just even this year with the FAFSA, the free application for
the ever-changing, evolving FAFSA, which apparently is coming out with a new version yet again.
Yes, and that, many students were blocked in that. So it is about, and in higher ed, we have formulaically through states and nationally invested in the universities that have the students that have resources. It's just counterintuitive. And so we want to make sure that everybody with talent has the opportunity to be a part of everything that has to offer. So we have we have 23 what we call memorandums of understanding, but we have basically compacts with school systems, tribal nations, the Coalition of Black and African American Education on guaranteed admission. But it's more than that. It's about making sure that we're helping support those students as early as the third grade, understand what it means to come to a university. And the school buses pull up right below my office window. So I see the school buses come with students of all ages in K-12. It's also the partnership with our community colleges. We have some great community college leaders across San Diego County, but just a few I have to give a shout out, Dr. Sunny Cook at Maricosta and Dr. Star Rivera Lacey at Palomar, because they are my neighbors and great partners and leaders right here in my region, working together to make sure that we have a pathway for the students. But it's also about the community offering these paid internships or these experiential learning. And I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I want to add an example. We have students that come into our labs in the summer and work with our faculty. And if you think about it, who gets to work in a lab during the summer? Well, traditionally, it's the people that can afford it, right? Because if somebody's working full time or has to work during the summer to pay their tuition, they don't have time to be free labor in a lab or to learn for credit in a lab or anything else in a lab in the summer. So one of our fundraising initiatives is raising money for our summer scholars, as well as our faculty doing amazing work applying for grants. And what that means is that our students can work in these labs and get a stipend and have a place to live and food so that they can choose to be in this lab and have that learning experience. It means that talented people can be in our labs, and that's not divided by who can afford to be in the lab and who can't. Mm-hmm. Think about how important that is. I went into my first years, I went into a lab, and the whole group in the lab was working on alopecia areata, which is an autoimmune disease. And the person that took me on a tour, her name was Apple, and she wanted to work in cancer research and autoimmune because she had seen her mother pass away from cancer. She and her mother had been immigrants to this country, and she was a first generation student, had come from 2 community colleges and was in our lab. The next year I went in that lab, and that lab had found a marker for alopecia areata. And 12 students were part of writing up manuscript for publication on this, along with the leadership, obviously, of their amazing professor. These talented students wouldn't have had these opportunities. The barriers to them were the affordability to have the same opportunity that every other student had to be in that lab solving some amazing real world problems right here side by side with our faculty. So the barriers so many times are something we don't think of. I think we'll open the doors, but it's so much more than that. We have to make sure that students, every student, has that opportunity to be, in this case, in that lab, or whatever other experience, whether that's service learning, internships. Our School of Business has these great, they call the Senior Experience, and they are in consulting teams with local nonprofits and businesses, helping them solve a real world problem for their business or nonprofit. To be able to have those experiences as part of their education and not have finances be the barrier.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's those internships that really help a student decide, wow, this is thinking back to your story with Apple, right? This is the path for me. I have found my life's work. Or equally as important, I thought this is what I really wanted to do, but now that I've got to spend some time actually in that role or close to that role, I realize this is not at all what I want.
Oh, that happens too.
And it's the negative experience. I don't want to use it as negative, but learning what you don't want to do is equally as beneficial as learning what you do want.
I would agree. It goes back to the way to an end goal is not always a straight line. we have to be willing to try things and to stub our toe. And we should be offering that opportunity at a university with those experiences coming early.
Yeah. And again, that's where those early experiences where internships are so key. And this may be more of a theoretical question, but one of the things that I've tried to wrap my head around in the post-pandemic world is now with everything shifting virtually, how do employers continue to offer internships and offer internships that are actually meaningful? And what I mean by that is so much of learning for a young person comes just through osmosis, right? Behavioral modeling, just shadowing their boss or shadowing older people in the workplace and being exposed to workplace behaviors and norms and whatnot. And now that so much work is done remotely, they don't have the opportunity to, listen in on those water cooler conversations or see how, the president has all these short but meaningful conversations just getting down the hallway and stopping and talking with people. Any advice or suggestions to employers on how they can continue to offer meaningful internship experiences for young people in this sort of remote hybrid world we're now in?
Yeah, I think that there's such a great point you raised. And I remember when we went virtual during the pandemic, we thought, how in the world are our students going to have experiences, whether that's service learning, internships, or things like that. And I will say just that in this region, the whole of San Diego County and Northwest Riverside, we grew up with the region, and people have been amazing at offering opportunities for our students to learn and grow. And our students, I think, have given a lot to the community in that hours they've given, even in the paid internships, which they should bluntly all be paid in our area. But as you said, sometimes it is that touching and feeling and shadowing and seeing. I think right now with the hybrid workplace, it can be a both and, because in many cases, there are many places and spaces where there's still the opportunity to meet in person or be in person. And so making sure that as our students are having those opportunities for internships, that they have that opportunity to shadow someone or see what's happening. But I wouldn't discount what can happen virtually in an internship or any situation. It's just, we need it to be more intentional. More focused time where maybe, there is a time to meet with, making sure there is a time to meet or see what's happening with the president or CEO or whoever's in the company that you might get to see in a more casual way, and really thinking about what those experiences need to be. I saw that during the pandemic and was really, I will have to say, I have to give credit to our employers and our faculty, but I was so amazed with what I was seeing and the opportunities that our students were having. So I think that it's just as anything else, when we're either hybrid or virtual, the intention really has to be there. And I think for our students, they have to take advantage of asking the question, taking the opportunity, and not being scared to ask to have the meeting, if they're not going to run into somebody in the hallway going down. But I want to add to your point. Several years ago, Gallup, they survey everything, and they did the survey as who has what's the kind of the best way for somebody to be successful in their first job or career out of college, and internships and what I call engaged learning was the number one thing. When I went to college, they taught us to have that resume ready, which we should, and how to write a cover letter. And I remember still reading for jobs in a paper or a chronicle. Now I'm telling you how old I am. And mailing
a digital chronicle.
Yeah, stamps, and just waiting for somebody to look and see how amazing I was and call me up, which didn't happen as I would have hoped in many cases. But for really, all the time I hear that our students have been offered a job where they had the internship. Yep. And that, has bared out in the national data.
Well, and I will share one small story to illustrate your point, Dr. Neufeld. When I first started this company back in late October of 2016, in fact, the firm is almost 8 years old now.
Wow.
I was a guest lecturer, a guest lecturer in the business school in your MBA program. For one of the professors who was hosting a class on entrepreneurship and wanted to have a speaker come in who is an entrepreneur who just launched a fresh company. So I checked all those boxes. So I was the guest speaker for the day, and ended up that there was a student, a first-year MBA student who was in the front row. She showed up. She was prepared. She had her notebook. She came with really thoughtful questions. And, the speakers are always going to be able to connect with who's closest in proximity, right? And this is where in-person it matters so much. Anyway, long story short, she did all the right things. She followed up. She asked if we could have coffee and kind of pick my brain as a mentor. And fast forward, she started interning with our firm before she even graduated. She graduated. She came to work with us full time. She then went to work for a bigger firm up in Seattle, and now she's back with our firm. So, and gained a ton of experience that she brings back to Blair Search Partners. So, this beautifully illustrates that path we were talking about, that it's not always linear. And sometimes you have to step outside your current organization, gain more experience, and then you may come back at an even higher level later on down the track.
That's so true. And I think we don't get the word out on that whole career trajectory as much as we need to. Because you talked about a barrier. I think with the first generation student, it's much more likely that if there's a trip and stumble, that you don't have somebody that said, "Oh, I did this, just get on back up." And we've got to be comfortable in saying there's lots of different paths. It's okay if you need to leave and sometimes to come back, and that gives that breadth of experience. And it's all right to quote unquote fail, or really I call it trip. It's okay to trip. In fact, if you're not willing to do that, you're probably not going to be able to move forward.
Well, and you're probably not pushing the envelope and innovating enough in your own career, right? And taking that healthy amount of risk, but comes back to, and this is probably a huge factor in social mobility, but resiliency, right? And I think back to that book a few years ago by Angela Duckworth, Grit, right? And it really comes down to, one of the main success factors in life and career is resiliency and the ability to bounce back from life's small setbacks, whether that's bombing your calculus course or a dead car battery and you can't get to work, those sorts of setbacks, and how resourceful people have learned to accommodate those so that they don't get derailed.
And I will tell you that by the time our students come to us, they have grit and resilience that I could not have imagined at their age. I don't know if I could imagine it now, just making sure that they got here, and even the pandemic, we've watched students caring for their families, working several jobs, and still coming to school. It just really, I'm in awe of what our students accomplish every day.
And we just had a very interesting question, again, from Dr. Hilscher pop in the chat. And it's around the connection between social intelligence and social mobility. And I hadn't actually thought of how those two concepts are so closely intertwined. Is that, as Cal State San Marcos is teaching social mobility kind of as a practice and exemplifying that for other institutions to follow, is that something you're looking at and really making sure that folks see that connection?
What a great point in the idea of, that whole, you said social intelligence or emotional intelligence, and how that goes on being able to overcome a stumble or what you add to a classroom discussion. And while I'd say that that's always important in life success, I think that when it comes to social mobility, I bluntly want to be a little careful about too much credit there in that idea. It is the idea of a university's role in social mobility. I think I'd say that many, you could easily say that, so in terms of higher education in general as an entity and how we started with really being exclusive, right? It was for upper middle class and wealthy white males, and went to Harvard. The first 9 people in Harvard graduated in order of their status in their family, and that continued for 150 years. So the construct of higher education was built to exclude. And I think that when we think about social mobility, not to take away from social intelligence, what a great, that's obviously an important part, but before we ever get there, there are so many constructs that we talked about barriers that we need to make sure that we are knocking down to create the pathway and the whole different cultural shift of higher education, that it is here for lack of a better way to say it, for everyone, inclusively, to have access. And that goes back to that first generation idea. So it's not that that's not extremely important, but there are so many constructs that have been set up around higher education, and the journey to higher education long before you get here, that really has been about who we keep out. That it is incumbent, I think, on the system itself to create changes more than anything. I see so many talented students here. And if we go back to the conversation about who gets to be in the lab, it is the choice sometimes is, am I going to be able to afford next semester, so I'm going to have to go work somewhere else? Or can the university make sure that I get paid to work in that lab, get a stipend, and that so I can contribute to the body of research in my degree, and I don't have to make that choice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking, is there an even better term than higher education? Because even the term higher sounds kind of, it's way up there, and I don't know if you can reach it, right? And instead of maybe calling it just inclusive education, or how about just education writ large?
That's a great point. And that's the thing, it's technical term is post-secondary or whatever, but you're right. It's the whole idea of who are we inviting in? And so then even beyond inviting in, I can invite everybody in, but then am I really creating a pathway that everybody can take? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about intelligence here. That is not what I'm saying at all. I want to be careful when I say creating a pathway that everybody can take. We leave a lot of brilliant people behind because we're not creating the bridge and the pathway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Looking more at what's happening inside the university, if you could tell us a little bit about some of the emerging majors or some of the majors that you've been building up over the years, because I know a lot of the coursework you're creating is focused around these concepts that we've been talking about around inclusivity and social mobility.
I will tell you what I want to say to any faculty watching. I think all of our majors are amazing and important. And I always hate to just call out a few, but and obviously, I think the first thing I'd say is, because we are 35 years young and grew up with the community, we have many key majors that are very important to our region and impact our economy. But I'll highlight a few that are emerging, as you said, are emerging. And one is, we started 5 years ago building an engineering program here. And this is really with the help of Viasat and many others, Hunter Industry, Nordson, because we needed more engineers in this region. The other thing that when I spoke to the CEO of Viasat, he said, we need more diversity in our engineers. And about 50% of our engineering majors happen to be Hispanic. The national average for that is less than 15%. 30% of our software engineers are military affiliated. We have a large military population. So making sure that not only do we have these majors, but again, who has access to these majors? And so that is really up and coming in building those out. We have electrical and software and just started computer engineering, and are looking down the road to industrial systems, and hopefully looking down the road to a new integrated science and engineering building coming online to make sure that we can support those students. Another area is in the mental and behavioral health area. We sponsored a forum on what we can do to help and support mental and behavioral health. And thanks to a gift from Price Philanthropies Foundation, we have a new 3-year degree model where we start in the high schools. In fact, I got to visit Buena Vista, Rancho Buena Vista High School, and meet some of the people in our dual enrollment and welcome them. They were to be students at CSUSM right here at the same time they were finishing their high school degree. And so in that, it is really embedding certificates into our public health and human development majors. And so when the students graduate, they can do basically what we might call in the mental health field higher level tasks, and they're billable for insurance right away. So this is very much a need for our community, and it's good for our graduates. Now they can also go into our very much needed high demand social work program, but they can go right into the workforce with these degrees. And there's internships embedded, year-round wraparound services. So it's innovative in the way it's offered. It's offered through a wonderful gift through Price Philanthropies, and it again is really meeting the community needs where they are. So those are just 2 examples, and there's so many more.
And I would have to imagine if you are a young person, first generation college student, not only are you graduating from high school, you're graduating from high school with a year of college credit under your belt. That must be sort of a incredible magnifier, right, of the impact and that has on that young person, and boosting their confidence and increasing their likelihood for success and commitment to education in their career.
Yeah, it's again about that bridge with our K-12 and our community college partners and into the university, and helping give that taste and flow. And at Rancho Buena Vista High School, we have a faculty member there as well as a teacher from the school, so that there's even partnership in the education and planning of that class that I visited. Another example of that, and it's a partnership with Mount Santo Jacinto up and for students, a pilot in software engineering, where they spend 2 years in dual enrollment with MSJC, 1 year at MSJC and 2 years with us. And 3 years out of high school, they can have a software engineering degree. And we're piloting that right now. Then again, it helps people on that path. And so many times engineering has been one of those majors that has been harder to get into, or you have to take all just the right courses in high school. And this starts that path to that degree right there in their junior year in high school. So that's another pilot that we're doing that's innovative and a bit different. But that partnership involves our K-12, our community college partner, and the university.
And getting them into hands-on experience faster, right? So for employers always, the degree is important. Is it in a relevant field that I'm looking for? But also the hands-on experience, right, is so important to employers. And so you're accelerating the entire process by at least a year to 2 years.
And that's important to us too, to make sure that the students can have that hands-on experience. And literally for every software engineering graduate we have, there are 4 jobs. So that's again important for the community and important for our graduates.
Well, and if I could speak on behalf of the nonprofit sector here for a second, if I can take that liberty, Cal State San Marcos is seen as one of the powerhouses in terms of educating and deploying social workers, behavioral health professionals, mental health professionals, and we've all seen the numbers. I think it was a shortage of 18,000 projected over the next years for our region. And even if those graduates, they may get their degree, they may get their hours, they may practice for a little while, and they may very well go on to other things and leave the field. But what I can share is that so many of our nonprofit clients really appreciate folks who have that MSW and other similar degrees and experience, even if it's not active, even if they're not using it. That background is incredibly helpful if you're looking at a pipeline into nonprofit leadership someday. a lot of boards really appreciate candidates who have spent some time in a clinical setting, even if it was 10, 15 years ago. And it really also gives those candidates a lot of credibility in the space because they have been on the front lines, and they can relate to teams. They know how to build teams better because they've been members of those teams in the past. So, again, those degrees that you're generating can lead to all sorts of different rewarding career paths later on, inside and outside of behavioral health.
I think that's such an important point. And just a side note, I have a master's in counseling and I might use it every day in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not licensed to do anything right now, but I always, remember that degree. But that MSW program, the Master's in Social Work, that really came about through the needs of our community. And I think that's such a great point you make about our graduates. And I so appreciate it is that, once they've had those experiences, it puts them ready. And I think also talk about leadership in our nonprofit world. It's so important, and it's where the heart of a lot of our graduates are, and the leadership that they will have in our community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Neufeld, we are at the end of our time. Let me express our sincere thanks for joining us on the program today and sharing some insights into the career path of a university president and really digging into this concept of social mobility and connectivity to workforce development and social impact. And we crammed a lot into 52 minutes.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And we look forward to following your work. And if there's anything we can do to help you advance your mission at Cal State San Marcos, please let us know. And for all the folks who joined the conversation today, thanks very much. We had questions pouring in and comments. We tried to get to as many as we can. Thank you, everyone. Please follow us on LinkedIn, and you can see all of our upcoming shows as well as access older shows. And you can follow Dr. Neufeld on LinkedIn and obviously on Cal State San Marcos website. She is out in the community speaking all the time. So lots of opportunity to continue and be part of this conversation. In the meantime, thank you everyone for joining us. And we look forward to the next session. And again, Dr. Neufeld, thank you so much for spending a chunk of your afternoon with us.
Thank you.